Hi, it's Gareth here from Busby's Bakery. Today I'm going to show you a really simple white bread recipe. If you're new to bread baking or dabbled and not had much success in the past, I recommend that you start here, because this is going to teach you all the basics you're going to need to know to bake bread at home. If you've looked at the 15 stages of bread making article on my website, you'll find that a lot of the stages are used in this. We don't use every one, we want to try and keep it fairly simple for this basic bread recipe. So let's get cracking. We've got simply flour, water, salt and yeast. So beforehand we need to start activating the yeast. So what I'm going to do here is take 50 grams off the total amount of water that we're going to use, because we always weigh the water, and we use that 50 grams to activate the yeast. So it's 50 grams. Give that a stir. And we just leave that to sit for about 5 to 10 minutes before we start adding it to the recipe. Now what we can do whilst the yeast is activating is weigh the water and add the salt to it. So we're going to take our bowl, and the recipe calls for 360 grams, but we've already used 50 in the yeast activation, so we're going to add in 310, and this water is cooler than that. That should be about 35 degrees. This one depends on the temperature of your room environment. Normally just tap water's fine. If it's really cold, you might want to use warmer water, about 20 degrees, 18 degrees, something like that. And if it's really hot, you might want to be using cold or ice cold water at about 1 to 3 degrees. And temperature and the length of the rising, the fermentation, they all affect the quality of the dough. What I'm going to do now is add the water to this water, add the salt to the water, and give it a whisk. You don't always have to break down the salt in the water. In fact, I never used to. But kneading by hand and using rock salt, sometimes it doesn't break down very well, and you end up getting to the end of kneading and you've still got these crystals in there, and you want that salt to be absorbed and dissolved into the flour, into the dough, to help structure it and control the gas created by the yeast. So I found the only way to do that, if you knead it by hand, is to dissolve it in some water and leave it there for 5 minutes. So after we've left that to do its thing, we're now going to add the yeast and the water to the dough. So first of all, we pour the yeast in, like that. Give this another little whisk. So we've got, and then just to make sure we don't lose any of the yeast, we're going to pour a bit in there, like that. So if you're using fresh yeast, what you would do is double the amount of yeast, and you wouldn't have to do that activation part. You could just add all the water in one go and add the yeast in with the flour at this stage now. Okay, I would still recommend whisking the salt, but hey, you might find that you don't need to. If you're using table salt, you don't need to. I prefer to use sea salt because, well, basically there's an anti-caking agent that goes in to stop it caking, and that's going to go into your bread, so I'd rather have my materials, all my ingredients, to be as pure as possible. Next up, we're going to start kneading. Now we need a timer. I'm going to set this for 5 minutes, and it's really handy to have a timer because then you know how long you've worked it for. You're not half of the time you're going, oh, well, how long is it enough? I don't know. But if you stick to these times that I'm going to show you, you should get a fairly decent result each time. So using our dough scraper, if you don't have one, I'll teach you another way. Start with our dough scraper at the top, and then our hand at the top, and then we just move them in a, one goes clockwise, one goes anti-clockwise, okay? And then we just give it a little flick over like that. And depending on how your dough's working, you might find at this point, oh, it's a little bit dry or it's a little bit wet. I just say see this out. Just give it a couple more minutes. I don't really like adding more water or more flour to the dough. but half the time you add more water and then 5 minutes later you realise there's too much in there. Without a dough scraper, use your hands in a claw sort of shape like that, and then you just do the same sort of thing and just move your hand around the dough. So now we're going to gently knead this. What I think is really important when hand kneading is that you replicate what happens in a mixer, which is you have a slow mixing time and then a fast mixing time. So we're going to do this slowly. What we do is take our hand and we're going to try and work the dough with just the bottom part of it, okay? And that's just going to reduce the surface area that we touch the dough with, which in turn will then make our dough less warm. So taking our palm with that hand, just push away like that. Okay, and then we put it back in. We just push it away like that. And you should feel that there's wet bits and there's dry bits in here. And if you've realised, I don't add any flour to the table because that just gets absorbed by the dough when kneaded. So you should never add flour to the table when kneaded. Getting a little bit sticky, that's fine. It's also still quite dense in other places, so we just keep moving this technique on. So pushing it away with right hand and bringing it back, and then using the left hand to kind of encourage it to stretch. Now this way helps to hydrate the gluten in the flour, the proteins, nice and gently so they can get nice and unwoven and nice and strong. We're just going to repeat this until our timer goes off. So, when our timer's up, take a dough scraper again and lift it off the table. If you don't have one of these, maybe a palette knife would do. In there like that, and then we're going to cover it with a carrier bag, cling film. You can use a lid if you've got one. Failing that, you can use a tea towel. It's not as good, but it'll be fine for this short amount of time we're going to leave it to rest. So we're going to leave this to rest for about 5 minutes. Now, if your dough felt really warm and sticky, pop it in the fridge during this time, especially if it's warm in your room. If it's not, like it's not here, it's about 18 degrees apparently, then fine, leave it out airborne. So we're just going to leave it for 5 minutes. So during that time, the dough has been left to just ferment and develop naturally. It's really, really good for the flour to build its strength and its hydration. So that now we're going to do some faster kneading. Now the gluten matrix is going to be nice and strong. It's going to be like a platform to perform, so that we can make a really good structure, which will then mean we get those nice little holes in our bread. So take this out of the bowl. And if you wanted to skip that stage, the rest stage, and just knead for another few minutes, then you're more than welcome to, but I just find this way helps a little bit and it's a little bit less effort. So next again, we're going to set our timer for 5 minutes, and I'm going to show you. I set that timer for 5 minutes, and I'm going to show you how I knead bread. So first of all, I take my hand out like that, and now you should feel the dough is a little bit less sticky now, yeah? And slap it on, stretch it out and slap it on the table. So you pick it up like that and slap. Pick it up like that and slap. And we do this about 8 to 10 times. And then we just turn it like that and roll it over a little bit, okay? And after that first little roll over, you'll feel the dough completely transform. So the time has ended. Now what you probably found there is that it started off really hard to work to start with, then it got quite easy, then it got really easy, and then it starts to firm up near the end. Don't worry too much if that didn't happen, because at least you know you've worked the dough for a decent amount of time. Now's the time we would normally take a temperature reading of the dough. And what we're looking for here is to see what temperature it is. Now, I would say for most artisan breads, you want to kind of have it at about 25 degrees. Any colder than this, if it's below 20, it's a little bit too cold and it's going to take a while to prove. So I would recommend putting the dough now into a bit of a warmer place. If it's hitting 28, 30, you might decide to then put it in the fridge, and depending on how hot it is and how hot the room is, then I would determine, you might just need to put it in there for like 10 minutes just to cool it down a little bit. Then you can take another temperature check, go right 25, bang on, just take it out of the fridge now. Or you might end up just putting it in there for a while. But either way, we're going to leave this dough to mature naturally for about 45 minutes. Once again with the bag, cover that over, and that just stops the dough from drying out and get affected by the oxygen too much. So set a timer, 45 minutes, and then we'll come back and have a look at it then. Once we've left it to rest, now we can do a stretch and fold. Take the dough onto the table. We should find that it's a little bit gassy, a little bit stretchy. Now we're getting this window pane effect, okay? So to do this, I've got some flour on the side just in case. We try not to use it, but sometimes it does get a little bit sticky, so I've got it there just in case. First of all, we're going to pull the dough that way. And then we pull it back again. Then we're going to fold over and over again with the dough there. Then we're going to take this bottom bit, flip that over the top as well. Take the sideways bits, pull that out, and use my fingers, fold over, just to about halfway of the original middle. Take that bit over, fold over like that, and then fold them over together. You can do it any way you like really. It's about folding that way, folded that way, fold over, folded that way, fold over, folded that way, fold over. Don't worry about it too much if it gets confusing, especially when you're first starting off. You just want to just fold it over a little bit, and that extra folding will help the dough no end because it gives the dough tension, it builds structure, and most importantly what this is actually doing is just moving everything around in the dough, so you're not got warm bits all around the outside or gassy bits in one area. So now we're going to leave this dough back in the bowl. Cover again, and we'll leave that for another 45 minutes. I should also add, you should probably take a temperature check if you've got a thermometer. Again, we're looking for that 25. It can be a little bit warmer now if you want to. If you can be 27, 28, that's okay. If it's way warmer than that and it's a warm day, put it in the fridge for another 10 minutes. Again, if it's cooler than that, you might want to warm it up a little bit. So we've left it to rest, so that's the bulk fermentation stage, that's done now. And so that's allowed the dough to mature, we've got a bit of gas production going on, the yeast has warmed up a little bit, and we should now have a really nice dough structure. So again, out onto the table. Look, you can check the gluten, we've got a nice thick structure here. If you just take a bit, it just feels so strong. And yeah, it's great. That's great, it's great. You can also maybe see a nice sort of shiny sort of sheen that comes on the top. That's the natural oils coming out. And that's really a good sign that the dough is ready. Now, if your dough doesn't look like this right away, then maybe it needs a little bit longer to bulk ferment, maybe it's a little bit cold. If the dough's a little bit sticky, then it could be that the flour you've used didn't hydrate as much water as this recipe says to. So next time you make it, add a little bit less water. Or it could be that it's just not got that structure, and that could be because you're not using the right flour. Now it's really important that you use bread flour for for this sort of bread. You can get away in some cases with all-purpose, because that's around 8% protein. But just check the side of the packet. Really, for this sort of bread, you want to be looking for a protein that's around 11 to 13%. Too high and it will be all stodgy and dense. A bit too low and you won't be able to create as much of the gas retention. But you can still make good bread either way. It just won't be the same as this one. I've got a little bit of flour on the table, more sort of just in case, but we'll definitely use it to rest the dough. I'll show you in a second. Now let's get on to shaping. We're going to take our dough upside down, like that. And that's going to be the irregular side, yeah? We've got the smooth side now on the bottom and the irregular side should be there. That shouldn't stick too much. If it does, then we'll have to use a bit, pop it on the flour, like that, okay? Next, give it a little flatten with your hand. This just pushes out some of the air and forces the gluten structure to rebuild. Okay? Then pull this top bit towards us. Okay? Give it a turn. Repeat. And any extra gas that you can push down in these areas, then do. This top bit here we try and leave because that's where the strength's being built in the dough. So don't worry, if it feels overly gassy, we'll sort that out in the shaping bit in a moment. So again, we'll just turn it over. You can use your finger to help as well. Push in like that. Turn over again. Like that. One more time, I think. Now if you get your hands like so like a V shape, yeah, and slightly pointed that way, so V and then that way, yeah, and then we're going to just pull the dough a little bit until it starts going outwards, okay? Pull the dough towards us. Then give it a quarter turn and pull the dough. Now you should only have to do this 5 times roughly. Professional will do it in 2 or 3 goes. If you're doing it like 10 times trying to make the perfect ball, just stop because it's not helping anything. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so what this does is it encourages the outside to be nice and strong, which will support the tension in the dough and hold the insides all together. And it also makes it nice and round so it's easy to be shaped again. So what we do now is leave this for 10 minutes. That just allows us to relax, and then when we shape our dough, A, we're going to have knocked out a lot of the air, and B, it's also going to be easier to shape because it's going to be held together better, and it'll hold its shape when it rises as well. While that's resting, I'll show you how to line the baking tin. Now this is just a standard baking tin with little dimples in it. You don't need these little dimples, they kind of ruin the appearance a little bit in my opinion, but anyone will do, preferably something that absorbs the heat quickly. So I've heard people using cast iron ones, they struggle with it even though they feel really meaty and good, they're not as good. So all I'm going to use is a little bit of oil. Now this has got a non-stick coating on it, but it used to work really well. Now I don't really trust it. I think it's got a little bit worn, a little bit used. So I had a little bit of oil. So I just put some on a kitchen roll and then just rub it in. Importantly, do the top bits there. Once the timer's gone, we're ready to start shaping. So we turn it over like that, and again we check that it's not too sticky, and we try not to use flour unless we really have to. I'm going to use a tiny bit. Okay, then push down, and this will knock out any more air. Not too wide, you don't want it too flat, otherwise you have to put more strength into it. Okay, then take the top piece over, turn it a little bit, grab it again, turn it a little bit more, turn it so, and do another one. So you've got about a third left. Now lift it up and then fold the sides in like that. And again, just give it a little pat down. Take the top over, fold in like that. And you might need to just stretch it out a little bit now, just to make sure all the dough's even at the bottom. And go over again, and just using your fingers, just push in like that on the seam. You might burst a couple of bubbles doing that. Then you can kind of give the edges a little cup like that if you want to. Doesn't make that much difference. And then lift it up, and it goes into the tin. So the seam side, the one that's on the bottom, goes at the bottom here. And then you can either wrap it in a bag loosely so it's sort of held up at the edges so it doesn't touch the dough, or you can put like a big lid like that on if you've got one. So we're going to leave that to prove now. The oven's heating, get ready to bake soon. Now what I've got here is a baking stone. Now this is the dirty side, and you can see the other side's nice and clean where I've not used it. So basically this goes in the oven and it heats up. It takes probably, depending on the power of your oven, maybe an hour, maybe a little bit longer. My oven's very cheap and nasty, and it takes a little bit longer. But you want to get it hot and then keep it there for maybe an hour. And that will get the stone really hot, because even though the oven temperature's hot, the stone's got to get hot from the core. Now what this does is help our oven spring, and it helps to make sure that the base of the bread gets baked evenly. So what's oven spring? Oven spring is what happens in the oven during the first 10 minutes of baking. The dough rises from around 10 to about 30%. It gets this oven spring. So basically what happens is the yeast loves a bit of warmth. So when it goes in the oven, it starts rapidly working, which makes the dough rise. What we do also is make the environment nice and humid, so we're going to add some steam, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And what that does is basically coats the crust of the dough with moisture, which then protects it from the heat of the oven, which then stops the starches and that sort of conjoliate, I can never say that word, but basically it stops the crust getting hard, delays the crust setting so the dough can spring up. If you didn't add steam, you would get less oven spring, and you would get a softer crumb because it would be more dense, because it would be stuck in. And there's a few other reasons as well, but that's the main reason. Let me show you how it goes in the oven. So on the bottom here we've got a baking sheet, and that is in my oven directly on the bottom. It doesn't have to be in yours. I've just found that it just sits there and it works, but not every oven heats up the base that well. So then we've got our rack, on which this guy sits on top. Okay. So what we're going to use that tray at the bottom for is to pour water in, which will create steam. And then this guy here gets nice and warm, and that's where we bake our bread directly on. So I'm going to turn my oven on. Bottom heat only if you've got that setting. That just means that the stone will get really hot, and the heat will come from the bottom. Otherwise, if you have top and bottom, sometimes it says it's ready, it's hot enough, it turns the light off, says that it's ready, and the heat cuts out, but actually the stone isn't as hot as it should be. So, close the door. If you haven't got a baking stone, you can still bake bread. What I use is this nice thick baking sheet. Now the only sort of requirement that you will have is that it needs to be able to withstand temperatures of over 220, 230. And most of the baking sheets that you buy in the shops, in the stores, they do say what temperature they go up to. And then again, the thicker the better, because it will more evenly distribute the heat. To be honest, I use this one quite a lot when I'm being lazy. It goes in my kitchen oven, and when I'm maybe got the oven on for something else, I just think, well, it's a waste putting the other one on for the sake of one loaf or whatever. And I might maybe do some flatbreads to go in my dinner, or maybe a pizza. I did the other day. I did a couple of pizzas, and yeah, it works. It's fine. So now this guy's ready to go in the oven. Now, how do we know it's done? So first of all, the edge of the tin is now touching the edge of the dough, okay, or almost touching. Okay, the other way is to use the poke test, and that is where we just take our finger and poke it in the dough, and if it stays there for longer than 3 seconds, then it's ready. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on top, not too much. A lot of people get carried away, but too much, it just ruins it, I believe. And then we're going to cut, and if you don't have a bread knife like this, a lame, you can use, I think a serrated knife is probably best, a kitchen serrated knife, a bread knife. You can get small ones as well, which are pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut from there to about there, okay? And we're going to try and cut at a slight angle. We're going to try and do it in one fluid motion. So there. If you want to make it slightly deeper, you can go back over it, but it will open up as we bake anyway. In the oven we go. Our bread. And take some boiling water. Get the door shut as fast as we can. So we'll use some boiling water there in the oven on the tray underneath, and that creates steam. Obviously, if you don't have a kettle, boil some. You can use cold, but I found that the hot water, boiling water, doesn't cool down the oven as much and still creates steam. So you get a bit of a better result. I've dropped the temperature down. It was heated at 250. I've dropped it down to 230, where it will stay. And what we'll do now is bake it for about 30 minutes to 45, depending on the power of your oven. What we do after about 20-25 minutes, doesn't have to be exact, you just open the door slightly, and that just releases some of the steam and allows the crust to start going golden and nice and crusty. Okay, and here is our bread. It is looking absolutely fantastic. I really love the colour of it, that lovely orange colour. You've got the nice flour coating on the top. You've got the crust over there. You can see where the seams sort of split as it's oven sprung. That's a really, really good loaf. The full recipe is on my website, which is busbysbakery.com/recipes. You'll be able to find it. I'll also put a link in the description where you can find it. And this is like the first simple recipe, and there'll be plenty more to come. So if you want to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next video very soon.